Good morning and welcome everyone for joining us in this webinar. Depending on where you are, it could be evening, morning, afternoon. Whatever the case might be, please feel welcome to this webinar. So our webinar, as you can see, is based on how to use the Near Networks Localization Performance Measurement Framework. And it's part of an HLA series on shifting the power, which looks at how different organizations are implementing or are working in the space or sphere of localization in practice. So we'll have NIA and HLA presenting the work they've been doing in localization. But for now, please introduce yourselves in the chat. Please tell us where you're joining from. You can tell us what your role is, and please just feel welcome to this webinar. So next slide, please. We can go to the next one. So today I will be your host. My name is Nancy Mureti. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm the head of regional centers for the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. And we have 6 centers, Eastern Southern Africa, Western Central Africa, Asia Pacific, Middle East and Northern Africa, Eastern Europe, and LAC. And today we will have 2 panelists. We have Wejdan, who's from the NIA network. Wejdan is experienced protection and safeguarding consultant who has over 17 years experience in the aid and development sector. She has a bachelor's and a master's in psychological counseling, and her role is a global delivery manager for RSH, and she's part of the Church of Sweden's International Humanitarian roster, focusing on psychosocial support, but more importantly, for purposes of this workshop, Wejdan is the MENA regional representative for the NIA network and is also currently covering Central Africa and Western Central Africa. We also have Asad joining us, who is the lead for capacity strengthening under the Humanitarian Leadership Academy in the Asia Pacific region, which is one of the regions I mentioned. He's worked a lot in capacity strengthening, especially for CSOs. He's worked very closely from the regional level to local level with country organizations and partner organizations, helping them set the agenda on shifting the power wherever they are, and he's been very pivotal in implementing the NIA network localization assessment framework in different countries in Asia, and he'll be speaking a bit about that. Next slide, please. So this will be the flow of the presentation. I'll just give a very broad overview of localization in humanitarian action, and we'll have Wejdan talking about the NIA and the localization performance management framework, and then we'll have Asad talking a bit about the regional Asian Pacific Center and how they've been able to apply the tool. After the 2 presentations, we'll open up for any question and answers to the panel, and then we'll wrap up. Next slide, please. A few housekeeping rules. Please type your questions even during the presentation. Esther will be monitoring those, and then when it comes to question and answer at the end, we'll be able to see how we can address some of the questions that are coming up or some of the comments. Let's try and keep them respectful and on topic for the people who are attending, so that it's as beneficial as possible. If you need translations, you can turn on the captions at the bottom of your screen. Click on the 3 dots, which are written more, and then you can do show captions and select the language you want. And just settle in and yes, enjoy the webinar. Next slide, please. So localization in humanitarian action, and this is a very exciting webinar for me, because this is an area that I really focus on, working as the head of regional centers in the HLA. And since the commitment to localization in 2016 in the Grand Bargain Agreement, we've seen that the terminology and the strides we've been able to achieve in localization has evolved rapidly in the sector. But one of the things that we've realized is that there's different understanding of key terminologies. Just even localization is defined very differently by different constituents. It's sometimes used interchangeably with participation and partnership, but we do recognize that it is really broader than just those two elements. And from the very initial quote, making principled humanitarian action as local as possible and as international as necessary, the Grand Bargain has evolved, and it's actually on its third version, where from that sentence or quote, what does it actually mean in action? And if you look at the Grand Bargain 3.0, they have a focus area that is greater support is provided for leadership, delivery, and capacity of local and national responders. And then it has three key focus areas. That is quality funding, how we're ensuring we're giving quality funding, how we implementing localization for greater accountability, for greater efficiency, and how are we working in participation with local organizations. We've been able to achieve a little in some of these areas, but we still have a huge way that we need to go to be able to achieve what our ambitions are. I think recognizing quality funding could be slightly easier to measure, even though there's still elements of how do we exactly define this. But the other dimensions are very nuanced, and the dimensions that we really work with are the ones from the START network, which is the quality funding, how we're having equitable partnerships, how we're looking at capacity sharing, what is it in capacity participation revolution that we are able to do, how we localizing in our coordination mechanisms, how we ensuring that our local actors have visibility and are able to have a voice on the table and influence policy. So this webinar is very critical in this, because it sort of gives us ways that the NIA have come up with a framework to be able to measure the different dimensions. And I think the tool is really important for us to self-assess as local and international NGOs, for the tool to be used for others, peers, local NGOs, governments, to assess us as organizations and all the different actors in the humanitarian ecosystem. I think it's really critical to have this tool so that we can see how we are progressing. And I think I'll hand over to Wejdan to now take it from there and just tell us what is this NIA network tool. And then after she's done, we'll hand over to Asad. Please keep in your questions, your comments, your reflections coming in the chat. Esther and I myself will be monitoring those, and enjoy the rest of the webinar. Over to you, Wejdan.
Thank you, Nat. Thank you for hosting, and thank you for the Humanitarian Leadership Academy for inviting me. Actually, you have already started, but the core of what I'll be saying here as Wejdan from NIR is what is this tool, why, and how? And I will start by who. So can we, next please? So we as NIR, we were founded back in 2016 with the commitment to the Grand Bargain. We are a network of let's say, a movement of local and national civil society organizations from the Global South who share the commitment, or who share a common goal for fair, equitable, and dignified aid system. And you are speaking about the Grand Bargain, just ignited something within me to give a little bit overview about how we started as NIR. So we as NIR officially, we were launched by 96 Global South leaders during the World Humanitarian Summit back in 2016. The idea was broad at the onset, which was to create a vibrant and influential network of civil society actors from the Global South. For those that will recall that the World Humanitarian Summit also saw the agreement of the Grand Bargain, which included a target that NEAR's founding members lobbied hard to include. This was a commitment of founders and international organizations. There was a commitment actually to provide 25% of all humanitarian funding directly to local and national respondents by 2020. NEAR also became active in the Grand Bargain's localization work stream, challenging the definition for who can be considered as a local organization. Then we became the first signatory of the Grand Bargain from the Global South and remained so until end of 2020. So our aim as NEAR is to reshape the top-down humanitarian and development system to one that is locally driven and owned, and it's built around equitable, dignified, again, and accountable partnerships. I think this slide was updated last year, but now if I speak about NEAR, I'm speaking about 245 members with 11 networks and partners covering 35 even countries from Latin America, Asia and Pacific, Africa, and MENA region. Next, please. So going from who to what? What is the Localization Performance Measurement Framework, or what we call LPMF? If you go to NEAR website, you will find a lot about it and how it was even created at the beginning. But when we had that commitment to the Grand Bargain to channel 25% of the fund directly to local and national organizations, one of the challenges of the Grand Bargain commitment was there was no system in place to be used for action planning and assessing and monitoring the progress made in meeting these commitments by programs, organizations, and countries. There was various initiatives back between 2017 and 18 to fulfill this gap, like the work that has been done by the Humanitarian Advisory Group and GMI's work with the START network, some of which were the inspiration of NEAR's effort to come up with the Localization Performance Measurement Framework. So the purpose of it is considered as a tool to evidence progress towards achieving localization commitment. While it's focused on the local and national actors, it is anticipated that it will also be relevant to INGOs, UN agencies, and donors, as well as research and academic institutions that are evaluating localization. The LPMF, or the Localization Performance Measurement Framework described, has benefited from the support and assistance of a range of stakeholders and builds on existing research from HAG, or the Humanitarian Advisory Group, while efforts have been made to ensure that it's consistent with the structure of a Grand Bargain commitment. Some minor changes in emphasis and prioritization have been made where it's felt that these will improve clarity and avoid confusion. Actually, the development of the Localization Performance Measurement Framework has been guided by the objective of delivering a tool that is clear, practical, and that can assist in strengthening the evidence base for localization and advance common understanding on the progress that's been made, as well as identifying areas of weaknesses. So again, it's an evidence tool that can be measured. Assess first where to start, measure the progress, and do evaluation, and the focus for local organizations, but it can be used by different stakeholders and actors, including UN and research and academics. And I will be providing the link to it from our website, where everyone to see what is this tool and why this tool has been created. Next, please. So Nancy started by speaking about funding, partnership, capacity, and visibility. So being inspired by previous efforts of creating this evidence tool, this tool that NIR created has 6 components or 6 content sections. One speaks in partnership, funding, capacity, coordination and complementarity, policy, influence and visibility, in addition to the participation. So these structured 6 colored coded localization component, as you see in the screen. Each component in the framework has desired change, which outlines the shift that needs to occur to contribute to achieving localization, and each has key performance indicators which are grouped thematically, like under funding, we have quality, that are thematically grouped as a quantity and qualitative and quantitative. And if I give example of the funding, under the funding, we have quantity of funding and quality of funding. In addition to that, each has impact indicator, which addresses whether localization has impacted the humanitarian system. Before we start by saying, should I have the 6 components? Should I use some of them? Should I use all the KPIs? Before the starting even, the performance assessment, the decision should be made about which of the localization component listed here in the framework to measure. And for each component, which KPIs outlined in the framework are most relevant. And after the decision, once the selection has been made, relevant measurement strategies should be selected for the framework. For the framework performance against relevant KPIs. You don't need to have all key performance indicators. You don't need to follow all. So relevant, let's say, performance against relevant KPIs can be assessed through a range of approaches, which include key informant interviews, focus group discussions, direct observations, document review, and secondary, document review and secondary data. This assessment doesn't have to include all KPIs, but should include those which are considered most relevant to your purpose and to your own context. Once the scope of the assessment has been defined and measurement strategies have been selected, then the research can be conducted. Next, please. So as you see in this slide, this is how it looked like, the 6 components and the desired change, the impact indicator, in addition to the relevant KPIs underneath each component. Next, please. So what are the desired changes underneath each component? If we look at the partnership, we start with more genuine and equitable partnership and less subcontracting. Unfortunately, in many cases, till this moment, when people speak about partnership, they are still speaking about subcontracting. Most of NGOs are still tracing INGOs to have to be even subcontractor. We didn't reach the level yet to speak about genuine and equitable partnership. Then if after we move from the partnership under funding, the desired change is improvements in the quality and quantity of the funding for local and national actors. And there is, you will see under the KPIs, there is difference between the quality funding and quantity when it comes to the funding and the risks and others. So moving to the capacity, under capacity, more effective support for strong and sustainable institutional capacities for local and national actors, and less undermining of those capacities by INGOs and UN. So even us within NIR, when we speak about capacity, it's either capacity sharing or institutional capacity, just to make sure that there is no undermining to the existing expertise that are coming from the local and national organizations. Next, please. Moving to the 4th component, which is around coordination and complementarity. Under that, our desired change is to greater leadership, presence, and influence of local and national NGOs in the humanitarian leadership and coordination mechanisms. And by moving and scrolling down, some of you will just hear something more than funding. Most of INGOs or NGOs think that localization only speaks about the 25% that was an outcome of the Grand Bargain, while localization is wider than that. It's even include not only funding, includes coordination and complementarity, and the presence that we are bringing local and national organizations to do and to affect in the humanitarian leadership as to contribute to the decision making, not only to the receiving the decision and implementing, which is reflected as well in the partnership modality and the partnership approach. Moving to the policy influence, which complements what I've just said, and visibility. Our desired change is increased presence of local and national actors in international policy discussions and greater public recognition and visibility for their contribution to the humanitarian response, and moving to the participation of the people that affected by the crisis. Under participation, we have fuller and more influential involvement of crisis-affected people in what relief is provided to them and how. In most cases, we discuss what relief is being delivered. We don't discuss how, and we don't discuss the decision and many others. So those are the 6 components in the localization performance measurement framework, and those are the desired changes underneath. Next, please. So going back to who can use it and how it was previously used, the main focus is to help networks and local organizations, but INGOs and donors, academics, and it can be used for research and for design. As you see on the screen, there are some examples. I will not list all. Examples of local organizations, INGOs, networks who have used it. But I'll give just a quick example from one of the INGOs, which is, for example, IRC used it for their partnership policy review. Nahab in Bangladesh, that we will speak a little bit, myself and my colleague, about measuring challenges faced by local and national NGOs in progress and localization. In Turkey as well, the localization group or the localization advocacy group used it to conduct baseline measurement of localization with Turkish organizations, while Expertise France, in partnership with nearest partner HDF, they used it in a research in Lebanon, and they used it to map out map into localization in Lebanon and Save the Children, who's the host in some countries, used it. One of them is Norway in the baseline and assess in progress on localization. So again, that proves that it can be used by different stakeholders and different actors for different purposes. Next, please. I will just now give one thorough example from MENA region on how this tool has been used, which is back in 2020, when in 2020, when the conversation in Northwest Syria started about dialogue about localization. So the Northwest NGO Forum in Syria started in November, set out to initiate dialogue between parties involved in responding to the humanitarian crisis, specifically to Northwest Syria. To achieve this, they adopted the localization performance measurement framework to them as a tool to survey stakeholders, donors, UN agencies, INGOs, and national organizations. After the survey, the stakeholders were brought together to a workshop for dialogue on different views to localization, because again, everyone defines localization differently. So they all were brought together to discuss different views in terms of views to localization, and this approach was a success in building understanding and common ground to advance in localization in Northwest Syria. Next, please. So we had some sections on that. But for donors, the localization performance measurement framework was adopted to survey equality, transparency, result-oriented approach, responsibility, and complementarity in funding, frequent monitoring of project implementation, quality of funding, and multi-year funding, financing for institutional and overhead costs, participation in coordination and cluster mechanisms for advocacy and visibility, including capacity building and speaking about language translation in communication materials. Or you see how just doing the baseline itself contributed to tackling different themes and aspects in the conversation with donors. Next, please. So again, for the UN agencies and INGOs and national NGOs, the localization performance measurement framework was adopted to survey partnership approach. Funding, access to direct funding was only surveyed among national organizations, while it wasn't surveyed by donors. Capacity, coordination, and complementarity. Humanitarian leadership was only surveyed among national NGOs. They included policy, influence, and visibility, and they surveyed participation as well. Next, please. So that was the experience that the Northwest NGO Forum did for the context of Northwest Syria in Gaziantep. That's an example from MENA region. While I have a minor, let's say, or I will not, it's not minor, it's a huge success, but I will give the space to our colleagues from Asia to speak about how they did some work in Asia. But one of our, let's say, partners in Bangladesh, which is NAHAB, they adopted the localization performance measurement framework to understand the progress and achievement towards the commitment to localization in Bangladesh. The tool was also an instrumental in funding the gaps in capacity and institutional preparedness. It also helped in assessing the readiness of the local and national NGOs, and the process of adapting the localization performance measurement framework included translation into Bangla. When you speak about localization, you need to speak about the local language. So part of the process was translated to the local language, contextualizing even words and retaining only indicators that were relevant to local and national NGOs. Again, you don't need to take all indicators. You don't need to handle every single component and include. You don't need even to include all KPIs. Following this process, the localization performance measurement framework was also used as an advocacy tool for promoting localization. Next, please. As you see in this slide that it's been presented, the steps how to do it. So we spoke at the beginning that you don't need to have all components, but before you decide, you need to understand the framework, that we have components: partnership, funding, capacity, coordination and complementarity, policy influencing, visibility and participation. And for each of these components, there are a number of key performance indicators that you need grouped thematically, that you need to look into. Yes, I need the component. For example, I need to do the funding, but I will focus on flexible funding and quality funding because I have a lot of quantity funding. So after you select, or after you speak about the component that you're addressing, you select the KPIs, and each component, as well as I previously indicated, has a desired change which outlines the shift that needs to occur to contribute to the achieving localization. And consequently, each component has impact indicator which addresses whether localization has impacted the humanitarian system. So after I understand the general framework, then I assess. I go to step 2, which is assessing the localization performance. Each KPI again has one or more of means of verification, which are qualitative and quantitative, measuring which can be used to assess performance. Accompanying these are measurement strategies, which provide a tool and guidance to support performance assessment. Again, before starting the performance assessment, a decision should be made about which of the localization component listed in the framework to measure, and for each component, which KPIs outlined in the framework are the most relevant. Once the selection has been made, relevant measurement strategies should be selected from the framework. Performance against relevant KPIs can be assessed through a range of approaches, which again includes, as I said, the direct observation, the focus group discussion, the key informant interviews, or the review of the literature. The assessment does not have to include all KPIs, but should include those that they are again relevant. Once the scope of the assessment has been defined and measurement strategies have been selected, then the research can start or can be conducted. Moving to the step 3. On step 3, we just benchmarked the performance. The localization assessment summary offers a way to determine whether the progress toward localization commitment is being achieved. To use the use of simple, let's say, 4-point scale under poor, modest, good, and excellent to indicate the level of the progress that has been achieved against each of the localization KPIs allows for, let's say, to compare the results and to bring all of them together. Using these findings of the research indicate the progress made for each KPI, and the result should be entered directly into the table. After I make sure that I even benchmarked and I scored whether it's poor or modest or good or excellent, I input directly to the table. I move based on my assessment, where I am from funding, if funding is included, where I am from capacity, if capacity is there. Is it poor? Is it modest? Is it good? Where I am from policy, do I have anything on the ground? And what should I do? I move after I assess to the step 4, which is action planning. The localization report and action plan summarizes progress made and identifies key actions that are required to strengthen localization. A brief summary should be written of the overall findings for each of the localization component, changes that are still required to make progress towards the localization impact indicators should be documented. In addition to that, action that need to be taken to make further progress should be outlined. So these are the 4 steps that start by understand what is the framework, then assess what I need to do, and after that, do benchmarking, categorizing them, categorize your status quo, let's say, then to move to action planning. What should I do to make sure that I move this, for example, component from poor to modest this year? Then what actions I should have in place to make sure that I'm progressing and I'm monitoring the progress and monitoring the achievement related to the localization commitment. Next, please. So I just explained on that, let's say, slide, but again, now you see, and I will add the link, that step 1, which is the understanding the framework. Under partnership, we spoke about the desired change, but we have impact indicators that include equitable and complementarity partnership between local and national actors and INGOs. UN facilitate the delivery of relevant, timely, and effective humanitarian response. Then, if you choose to work on partnership, you see what are the key performance indicators, you select the most relevant, and you move ahead. Next, please. After the selection, again, In the partnership, under partnership, we speak about assessing the performance and identifying what are the key relevant performance indicators. We move to identify what are the means of verification and what are the measurement strategies. There is an example on the slide. If I just say, if I use equality in relationship in terms of the indicators and shift the project base to strategic partnership in addition to engagement of partners throughout the project cycle. If I select the three key performance indicators, I go to the means of verification. Before I say I see where I am now, I need to have means of verification. So, for example, under partnership, for example, one of the means of verification, partnership agreement, clearly defining the nature of the partnership, strategies, project focus, subcontracting, and refer to the persons, people, to the populations. Partnership quality monitoring tools are routinely used, which incorporate indicators in addition to the partnership agreement, and etc. And we can move ahead when it comes to the group 2 and a group 3. And in the section of the measurement strategies, we speak about the strategies related to the review of the tools and having, let's say, focus group discussions and review into the engagement, review of the nature of the partnership of the strategies. So while you have in every single component, you can find a lot of indicators, means of verification, and measurement strategies. And this is when it comes to assessing the localization performance. Next, please. So when it comes to the benchmarking performance, as you see, we have the localization progress. After I select the component, the KPIs, and addition to the strategies, what is the progress now? Is it poor? Is it modest? Is it good or excellent? So it's just simplifying where I am now, which allow me later on to compare maybe in 1 year from now. If I just say the quality in the relationship is poor and I come up with different actions to achieve, in 12 months from now, if I redo that, where I should place myself, if it's poor now and I do actions, what is the judge related to the effectiveness of the action that I added is where I'll be in 12 months from now. If it's still poor, then I'll need to go back to review what I did or to review the action. And if it's modest, that means that there were some achievements that and progress that I went through. Next, please. Moving to, again, action planning. The action plan should include the components itself, the impact indicators, that indicator that I selected to move ahead, with the summary of findings based on the status quo and changes still required and proposed actions. This, when you bring your analysis into action and agree on the steps that should take place to make sure that I'm achieving and I'm improving and enhancing. Again, it's in every single component, and each has this sheet, and each has different desired change, impact indicators, and let's say different categories and proposed actions. Next, please. I think there is no next now. So just to conclude, we were inspired to come up with this tool. We are ready to guide networks, INGOs, or local organizations who are committed and coming collectively with others to measure the steps and to measure the progress against localization. And you can download it from our website. I will just add the link right now to the chat after I finish, and I'm ready to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much. That was very comprehensive. I'll encourage people to put questions or comments. I've seen a few in the chat. We'll discuss them at the end of the webinar. So over to you, Asad.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and thank you, Wejdan, for giving a very wonderful overview of the overall performance measurement framework. However, I'll be focusing more on to the usage and as well as how much effective that tool was for us, and maybe I can share some of the learnings with the broader team on the usage of the tool in Asian regional office. So yeah, please can you go to the next slide, please? So in terms of the purposes, for us to start with, because, we're also one of the signatories to the Grand Bargain, and we would also, have to comply with the different requirements and commitments under the Grand Bargain. So for us to, where we can start on our localization effort, the first thing for us was to understand where we are standing in terms of the different spectrum of no localization to locally led. So the first thing that we have done was to understand the baseline, and as a result of the baseline, what we really understood was that where are the gaps, and where are the areas for improvements for us, and as an HLA where we can chip in, and how country offices on their own sort of develop different interventions and programs and allocate resources effectively so that they can improve on localization perspective. And the last thing was using this tool, we were able to harmonize the different approaches that different country offices were using at that time. And now we are using one, I would say, unified approach throughout the region, which I will be discussing in my next slide. Yeah, the next one. So, I mean, in terms of the steps, I think Wejdan has also talked much about those, but the approach that we have used in the Asian regional office was a mixed method approach, where our reliance was not only on to the qualitative data collections, but we also try to triangulate that information by setting up, and forming different teams, where we have a representative from each sections, each functions. For example, when we talk about the funding, we had a representative from the programs and as well as from finance. And when we talk about the partnerships, obviously awards and the partnership functions are the ones that are very sort of important for us to understand. And the second thing, when I say that it was a mixed method approach, we also have relied much on the evidence-based information rather than having word of mouth or things like that. So much of the reliance was on onto the evidence-based assessments. And before we kickstart, this self-assessment process, we have oriented all of those staff members on the different aspects of the tool, how to do the self-assessment, and the different dimensions that it has. So we have given an orientation to them. And then on the 7 different dimensions, we held workshops with all of those, key staff members in order to, understand on the 7 different dimensions like funding, partnership, to understand, where we are standing in. And, every dimension has a different indicators, and based on those indicators, we have assigned different scores to them. We have also collected at the country office level the different best practices around localization, so that we can understand better in terms of the different dimensions and get the score which are quite relevant, close to where they are standing. And then finally, the rest of the 3 are basically reporting on the dimensions of localization, and then send that report to the AR for the feedback, and that's how we have finalized that. But in terms of the usage, as I said, that the first thing for us was to develop the baseline that would inform us, where we are standing on a spectrum of no localization to locally led. But at the same time, it also helps us to monitor the progress of the country offices. That in terms of progress, where they are standing, where are the gaps? In terms of the areas where they need support for capacity strengthening. And that has also helped country offices to make informed decision making and also to allocate their resources more effectively and can adjust their strategies when it comes to the localization. Can you go to the next one? This is the process I just want to share with you. Like we have started with the day-long workshop where all of the key staff members from all functions were present. And we have also made sure that the presence of the senior management team and as well as cross-functional teams so that we have a representation from across all functions and all technical areas within the country office. And lately, in order to triangulate that information, we had also consulted with the different functions and as well as field offices just to make sure that the data is accurately captured. And with a group score on each dimension, because we have divided, the different members into different groups, and each group has assigned score to the different dimension. And then finally, we have in a plenary, we have finally sort of get the consensus of the final score, and that's how HLA finalized the overall process during the workshop. And the last thing is to, as we said, that the baseline score, which we will be sort of see in the next year that how much we were able to comply with the different requirements and how much country offices were able to bridge those gaps. Yeah. Can you go to the next one? These are just some of the slides because Wejdan was talking about the overall process. So as a result of the workshop, it's just an example. We were able to understand where we are standing in terms of the different, dimensions of the localization. Like, for example, I'm just sharing these results from the Nepal. Like, Nepal are the ones that are standing, 3.3 in terms of participation, 2 in terms of coordination. But in some of the countries where the context is totally different, for example, for China, they didn't have any score on participation and coordination because of the overall operating environment is totally different from rest of the region. So that also depends on the context within a country. But I'm just sharing with you the results that we have had from the Nepal country office. I can just go to the next one. Yeah. So the tool has actually helped us not only to come up with the baseline score, but we have also developed sort of an action plan for the next year as to how we're going to bridge up those gaps and also set a targets for us, which we say the desired score. And the next year, because we do the assessment everywhere, and the next year we see that whether we are able to meet those desired scores or not, and what were the challenges and issues that we have foreseen during the process so that we can realign and re-strategize ourselves. Not only at the regional office level, but also at the country office level. Yeah. Can you go to the next one? So this is basically the prioritization plan that we put together as a result of the assessments from the workshop and from different other meets. So that basically is a roadmap serves as a roadmap for us for the next year. And we try to bridge those gaps with the help from HLA and from the different other regional colleagues so that we make sure that we are progressing on localization. I think that's it from my side. If you go to the next slide, yeah, I don't think so. Any other slide I have on that side. Yeah, thank you very much. If anyone has any question, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asad. So I'd really like to open up the floor, and I've seen questions and comments coming from a few people. Since we have a little time, can I start with Michael, because you had a very specific question, Michael Hayden. If you don't mind, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Sorry, Michael.
Can I just read it for on behalf of her? Because
Yeah,
it's
sure.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Michael just said how, as the near measuring tool used the Grand Bargain Intermediary Caucus document, which provides further recommendations on how NGOs and INGOs UN should implement the Grand Bargain, promote localization, including. Actually, this tool was developed back in 2020 before we start speaking about the caucuses, but you know that the intermediary caucus was set up to face ongoing challenges with the relationship of donors, intermediaries, and local and national organizations, recognizing the need to build and foster robust relationship. While I'm speaking, it brings us back to some aspects that have been mentioned on the localization performance measurement framework about foster robust relationship. And the members of the caucus even have prioritized actions which strengthen principles of equitable partnerships. Under partnership component, there is equitable partnerships and better support to locally led humanitarian action. And you know, one of the critical issues, such as a specific funding target, the comprehensive standard and partnership-based approach to risk sharing. So it's all there. It's not mentioned the role of intermediaries, but when I speak about the risk sharing, the direct funding, the type of the relationship, it's all speaks about the role of intermediaries and enhancing the relationship, quality relationship that leads to quality funding and supporting. It's all about speaking about this caucus as a caucus. But if you go to the benchmarks, if you go to the sections, you will not find it, let's say, specifically mention the role of intermediaries. Over.
Okay, thank you. Did you see the second bit of the question?
It's
Oh,
not, sorry.
yeah. Okay, I think it's covered. The
Yeah,
ERC,
I think
it
so.
has been used with the ERC.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions? I can see you've answered some questions in the Q&A section.
Yeah.
Is there anything else anybody would like to ask?
I think Mazen, I would love to hear from Mazen because he added to the chat some aspects from the let's say localization dialogue that was held in 2020. If Mazen can unmute himself and speak. And I saw an interesting comment as well from, I think someone from Syria speaks about, till this moment, there is no tangible outcome. It's only some solo stories, but the efforts and the implementation is still very limited, if not resisted. I think in the context of the Northwest, there is now ongoing, let's say, initiatives. One of them is about initiating the National Reference Group to report to the Grand Bargain. And it's this platform is very important to see how is the commitment of the Grand Bargain. And there is another initiative going on in Syria, which is creating the localization lab, which is as a space for local actors and local networks in cooperation with many stakeholders to come together to build a movement and to build the bridges between the global north and global south, reaching commitments and solutions. So there are some ongoing, let's say, efforts in Syria that I think soon they will be announcing. But if Mazen can unmute himself to speak a little bit, because he was very, let's say, he was one of the leaders during that localization dialogue back in 2020.
Yes, thanks so much, Wejdan. This is Mazen. Hello, everyone. At that time in 2020, I was with the Syrian Diaspora Organization. So as Wejdan have mentioned, we were part of this report. So we work closely with the NGO Forum Care International as a representative of INGOs, and DFID at that time, or FCDO now, as the representative of DONA, in order to measure localization for Northwest Syria and to report to the Grand Bargain dialogue. Now, the thing is that when we have started which tool we want to use, each stakeholder or each group of stakeholders wanted to use different tool. So we have ended up on agreeing between local organizations and INGOs, agreeing on NEAR framework. We have reviewed other frameworks. I've mentioned that in the Q&A, like Piango, like GMI. There is a little difference. So I wonder if Wejdan would answer later on the major differences between them, if there is any, of course. It was not an easy exercise at that time because of COVID, so we have done it all remotely. So it is hard to keep the engagement of this group number of participants. So we have started with surveys in order to group as much as information as we could. And then we have selected 20 local organizations and less number of INGOs, and then a couple of donors as well in that, with focus group discussions for each group. And then we have grouped them together, or we have selected, a representative of each group and then grouped them together in order to have a transparent and honest discussion from the findings that we have brought. So let's say donors might say there is still capacity needed for local organizations in order to be funded directly. So in that dialogue, we opened the opportunity for donors to say what capacities they are referring to. We opened the opportunity for local organizations to defend themselves, whether they have that capacity or not. So that transparent, accountable discussion was really fruitful because it have ended up with a number of recommendations. Now, unfortunately, these recommendations are still valid because there is a little change, as Rana have mentioned in her comment. This year and last year, I was part of Concern Worldwide Localization study, and Northwest Syria is part of 5 countries as well that they are including in that study. And when we have done a repetition for focus group discussion, it seems that still there is a huge number of those recommendations are still valid. So I do agree, and I want to echo what Rana have mentioned in her comment, and I hope, as Wejdan have said, that changes are going to be seen this year or next year. Now, the major challenge, if you allow me, Wejdan, was from INGOs. Sorry, not INGOs, sorry. The major challenge was from UN agencies. Less participation in the surveys, less interaction in the focus group discussion, or in some cases, they did not at all participate in focus group discussion. Only we managed to interview 1 colleague from UN agencies compared with a huge number of agencies that are responding to Northwest Syria. So whenever it is a discussion about Grand Bargain, about localization, about all of those things, we always see UN agencies jumping at the front of the table in order to steal the mic and talk about the progress. But unfortunately, we are seeing less progress on that, and less interest from them in being part of any research or report in order to document this. I don't know what's the reason, but anyway, yeah, I just wanted to share all of what we had from that experience. Over to you, Wejdan.
Thank you, Mazen. Actually, there is one comment. How do you expect local organizations to move by themselves while they are not driving the system? So, of course, barriers are still the same. Of course, there is an opportunity, but we have a lot of barriers that we need to overcome together. Local organizations are not driving the system to be able to proceed. There should be a phase of building bridges between both parties, Global North and Global South, to come together and to move together for one reason, because local actors are not the ones who created the system. They are just dealing with it as is. So thank you, Mazen, for sharing your own experience through that dialogue. But what you have just shared is proof that this tool can be used differently, with some academics as an assessment. In some contexts like Syria, they wanted everyone to come to the table to start a dialogue around localization. In Bangladesh has been used differently. And in Lebanon, when Expertise France started this mapping, they reached out based on that baseline or based on that research. They were able all to come together to have, let's say, a national framework for institutional capacity building and having the task force for localization under LHDF, which is it has been used differently and outcomes are very different. And we cannot compare what has been done in Syria to what has been done in Bangladesh or what will be happening soon in other contexts. It's very specific. It's very, very specific. Over.
Thank you, Wejdan. Carispo, your hand has been up for a while. Please go ahead and unmute and speak.
Thank you very much. Carispo is my name, and I work with Save the Children in Uganda as the partnership specialist, but also a focal point for localization. Interesting to hear this discussion. Just to add more on how we have utilized the framework. We in Uganda, when we were designing our strategy, we thought that it was a good baseline for us to understand where we are standing, and that has helped us to design actions that we are now implementing to engage with the local actors in the process of localization. But also we use the tool to create awareness among the staff, because we did engage a different number of staff into the process, including the field staff and also the country office staff. That has helped to create more awareness about localization within the organization, and therefore everyone is part of the drive of making sure that we embrace localization in the organization. So I just wanted to supplement to that yes, it's a good tool, and for us, we think that it's like my colleague said, on an annual basis, we do self-country assessment, and that also helps you to know what do we share across the different countries. We understand where each of the country is standing. Over.
Thank you, Carisipo. Rana, I had seen your hand was up. I don't know if you want to speak, or is it what's in the comment box?
Hi. Yeah, I just wrote on the comment regarding the Northwest, like now, like for example, for the international NGOs, when they talk about the localization, they mainly try to force the INGOs policies and SOPs on the local organization, and instead of empowering them to use their own policies and their own SOPs, so they will be more independent later and improve their capacity and their in the governance and the policy structure. So this is something that actually what I can see now in the Northwest, there was like great work in the beginning that has a very increasing curve, but now it's just decreasing again, and some kind of resistance started to happen among INGOs and UN agencies specifically, like that, to not do the localization work despite that they continue to talk about it. Over.
Thank you for that comment. Anyone else? Esther, we can go to the last slide. Thank you very much for your comments and participating in this webinar. And I think some of the key things that are coming out are, yes, we have the tool. We're able to assess what some of the gaps are. But I think the next question is the so what? How are we using that information to inform our programming and for change at INGO level, at local organization level? How are we ensuring that we're using the tools to build agency? I think that's also coming up. And I think one of the key things is that depending on the context, this tool could be used in very different ways. I mean, you could have minimal funding and lack of access. So you can see how else you can use the tool if you're unable to gather together. So I think it's just showing that it's a very versatile tool. And I think one of the things Wejdan said is, I mean, this whole area of localization is evolving. So and so should the tools. And I know Nia is continuously looking and refreshing the tools to make sure that it's up to date with what is emerging. So I would really want to thank everybody here who has been able to be part of this webinar. It's been great to have you. A huge thank you to Wejdan and Asad for sharing their experiences. I just want to share that if you want to get in touch with us, our contacts are there on the screen, and we'll be having a webinar next month. Please keep an eye on it. It will be as part of our leadership and development inspirational series, and it'll be on AI and its impact on humanitarian skills that are needed with the evolving context. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Please feel free to reach out in any way that you might need information to any of us. Shukran, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.